Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Sharon Reed. Today, a special community conversation. This past week, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of rumors out there about the impending release of the grand jury announcement in the Michael Brown killing. While we do not have a date or time yet, community leaders are clearly getting ready. Early last week, Missouri Governor Jay Nixon joined leaders of the Unified Command to talk about preparations for the announcement. Here's Craig Cheatham.
As I've said before, violence will not be tolerated. The residents and businesses of this region will be protected.
Those strong words coming from Missouri Governor Jay Nixon last week. The governor saying state and local officials are preparing to keep peace and order when the grand jury decision in the Michael Brown shooting is announced.
You took my son away from me. You know how hard it was for me to get him to stay in school and graduate? You know how many black men graduate? Not many.
It's now been more than 3 months since 18-year-old Michael Brown Jr. was shot and killed by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson. Brown was unarmed. In the days after the shooting, there was rioting and looting in Ferguson. There have also been ongoing peaceful demonstrations across the city and county. Now, with all signs indicating the grand jury's decision is near, the region is tense.
We will not let Mike Brown rest until we get justice.
Some residents are worried, even frightened. The governor says police are preparing for a dual role, protecting the community and respecting protesters' rights.
Families must be able to see their kids off safely to school in the morning, walk their neighborhoods at night, and keep the doors of their businesses open without fear for their lives or property. Citizens must also have the right to express themselves peacefully without being threatened by individuals intent on creating violence and disorder. The world is watching.
Again, our Craig Cheatham reporting. Right now, we do not know the jury's decision, but it could happen at any time. And when it does, of course, we will bring it to you live. Still, we know many of you are worried. You are wondering, what are police doing to get ready? So during the next half hour, you will hear from leaders of the Unified Command together. They're all right here with us. So much at stake, protecting citizens, demonstrators, and property. Captain Ron Johnson, Missouri Highway Patrol, Chief Sam Johnson, City Police, and also Chief John Belmar with St. Louis County Police. Let's start with you, Captain Johnson. Governor Nixon's press conference clearly meant to send a message. Violence will not be tolerated, but the how, so few details. I know you can't tell us everything about the tactics, but what can you provide people who are so worried out there?
I think the first part of the governor's message is to our citizens, that they will be able to exercise their rights to free speech, they're able to protest, but also those in our community, they're going to remain safe. And he wants to make sure that this community is safe, this community remains whole. But then on the second part of that was that we are going to make sure that people don't get out and destroy this community. And those that come out for criminal behavior, we're going to make sure that that's not allowed, so the businesses remain whole and the homes remain safe.
You all got some praise. You got some criticism, too. Chief Belmar, you on this one. What can you say to people who did not like the policing tactics? What have you learned? What did you hear? What will be different?
You know, I think what's lost in some of this is the amount of time that the three of us spent engaging the community each evening. The protesters, shaking hands, taking pictures. You know, it took about 2 hours a night. We did that for probably 16, 17, 18 nights in a row. Made friends down there. We don't see continuous loops of that all the time because, again, that's perhaps more ordinary. But I would tell you that what I would say is we hope we never have to utilize those tactics again. But we also hope that we have peaceful protesters, that we can keep people safe, we can protect property, we can allow people to express their First Amendment rights. And it doesn't spiral out of control such as it did last time, to where we don't have to use those remarkable tactics and pieces of equipment.
But Chief Dotson, there's the hope, and then there's the reality. Do you feel like you made friends down there, that you can separate the peaceful demonstrators from those who want to agitate and work up the situation?
Absolutely. As John said, it started on the West Florissant corridor, but it continues as recently as the drive here today. We're talking to organizers of protests daily on the telephone, saying, what can we do to allow you to have your voices heard, but keep the community safe at the same time? We both want that. Both sides want that. We're building bridges every day. So what I would say is we have great plans to keep the community safe, to protect businesses, and to support the people that want to have their voices heard. And even the people that want to have their voices heard realize that when the criminal element comes out, they have to help us police our community.
So why so many flare-ups since August 9th? There were some good nights, but there were some bad nights too. Captain?
Because emotions are high. You know, and while we've taken some steps, those steps have been small, but emotions are high. And you know, in some cases it was caused by looting, some cases it was caused by altercations within the crowd. And so we're working together, we're meeting with those groups and making sure that we're being as professional as we can. We're also asking that they do that. But I think both sides have realized that in some cases there have been groups that aren't here for peaceful reasons. And we've both identified those, and we've actually come together to make sure that our community is seen in a positive light that it should be.
Okay, Chief Belmar said that you've been talking to demonstrators, leaders of several groups. Have you also talked to gang members?
I have, a couple different times. You know, in talking to them, they have concern for this community also. But they're also talking about some of the reasons why they have chosen that lifestyle. And so when we look at a lot of things, we have to look at jobs. We have to look at education. We have to look at housing within the communities. And so some of my conversations have been that kind of conversation. But we also have been talking about the role that they play. And that if we get out and we're destructive to our community, we're being a little bit selfish. Because we have to remember our loved ones that work in this community, the single moms, the grandparents, the seniors, or the cancer patient that needs to get out of their home, the people that use our transit system. So we've had those kind of conversations. And I can tell you one conversation that I had with one such gang member, by the end of our conversation, my eyes were filled with tears, but tears were rolling down his face. So I tell you, we are making some gains. And it just shows what conversation can do if we all come together and listen to each other and respect each other and understand our differences is what makes us better.
Would that gang member have told you first time they had a seat at the table with a high-ranking law enforcement officer, just a seat at the table?
And that's really important. That statement is important, that we talk about the table. And in our country, in our state, in this region, we have to make sure everybody that sits at the table has a voice, and the table is reflective of our community.
Along with Governor Nixon and law officers, protest leaders have also been speaking in anticipation of the grand jury announcement. Thursday morning, attorneys for Michael Brown Jr.'s parents spoke in Clayton. Like Governor Nixon and leaders of the Unified Command, they made it clear Brown's parents are also asking for peaceful demonstrations.
We realize that some people are anxious, angry, and want instant answers. However, violence, looting, and rioting is not a responsible way of expressing those feelings. It severely diminishes the opportunity for healing and positive dialogue going forward.
Yeah, the parents of Michael Brown Jr. so graceful through all of this. Can't imagine what they're going through. Is there anything that tells you people are listening to them when they make those statements for peaceful demonstrations? Or are these outside agitators just bent on doing what they do?
You know, I think our dialogue is with really the local demonstrators, the protesters, the people that have been affected by this, that have grown up in the neighborhoods, that really do have challenges. And I think we're making progress there. I think we're building relationships, and that's going to lend itself to trust. But I think it's a fair point when we talk about the outside agitators. Regardless of what happens here in Ferguson or St. Louis or our region, they're going to go home back to their cities. And if they're simply here to agitate, to empower themselves through the action of other people, that's very inappropriate. They can be here and do it, but if they break the law, then we will take action also.
How much have you been surprised by some of what's bubbled up since August 9th? Many people in that community say this has always been there. Were you surprised by the amount of venom towards police?
I think you always have to. I am surprised by how deep the fracture was between the community and law enforcement. But I think going forward, what we know is what I want that group to know, we've heard their message. And there are things that are already starting. Implicit bias training in my department, the governor introducing a jobs program, Mayor Slay introducing incentives to have a representative police department. So the dialogue has started and is being heard. and we've made progress. We can't afford to take a step backwards. And that's why when we sit down with the groups and try and build these bridges, we have a lot more in common. They want to see a better community. They want to see a better region. They don't want those outside agitators to be the story, the narrative that people remember Ferguson and St. Louis by. They want it to change to be what people remember this by.
What about the men and women in law enforcement that you represent? Some rumblings during much of this that they perhaps weren't on the same page, particularly with you, Captain Johnson, in the way you were leading up the command, the tactics that you chose.
Well, I believe you lead by example. I think if you're a leader that leads and gives examples, those that may be on a different side of your leadership and your philosophy will come around and see that in a different light. And so I think the unique thing about this unified command, I always say that we're three different leaders. But I think it shows what happens when you have diversity in leadership and understanding in leadership. And so I think it's played a positive role.
Okay. How about you, Chief?
I believe the same thing. I honestly do. I feel like that these officers out there are doing an outstanding job. Listen, they put some long hours in. We're going on 3 months. They're wore out at times. But you know what? They're ready to step up and do the job from here on out also. So I recognize the fact that they are wore out a little bit, but trust me, these are professional officers. They've used a tremendous amount of restraint, and I'm comfortable moving forward with these officers, absent of the uniform they wear.
Whatever Can I add to that a little bit? And I think we also have to talk about their spouses and their loved ones that are at home. They're going through a lot of stress, and they're worn down. You know, I talked about, you know, as policemen, we leave our homes to address the fears of our community. Well, now we're leaving our homes and seeing that fear in our home before we walk out of the door. So there's a lot that this whole community is going through, law enforcement and our citizens.
And we were honored. We got to speak to some of those police wives right here at News 4, telling their story, some of the stresses they're going through. So we certainly get it. When we come back, I want to talk more about the business owners, some of them taking up arms. How might that affect unrest after a grand jury decision is announced? Much more with the Unified Command when we come right back. Welcome back to our special community conversation on Ferguson. The grand jury decision appears to be coming sooner rather than later. There are concerns, of course, about the rights of residents and business owners and protesters, too. At a news conference last week, Missouri Governor Jay Nixon said police have been working hard to address the concerns of demonstrators.
Over the past 2 months, more than 1,000 law enforcement officers have gone through more than 5,000 hours of specialized training, with an emphasis on protecting the constitutional rights of peaceful demonstrators. The law enforcement leaders behind me have spent the last few months going into the community, to churches, schools, businesses, to listen to people's concerns and develop strategies to specifically address them.
Again, Governor Jay Nixon speaking last week. Joining me once again today, Captain Ron Johnson, Missouri Highway Patrol, Chief John Belmar, St. Louis County PD, and also Chief Sam Dotson with the St. Louis City Police Department. Let's talk a little bit about what the governor said. 5,000 hours, I believe he just said there. Is it making a difference? Will it continue long after the unrest in Ferguson? Captain?
It is making a difference. And I've talked about no matter whenever the grand jury decision comes out, we're still going to have a lot of work to do in this community. We're still going to have to get out and reach the community and, you know, go into high schools and talk to groups. And once again, like I talked about earlier, is it bringing everybody to the table and continue to work on solutions and work on growth in our community.
Business owners, some of them saying they're not going to take it anymore. They were critical of what they felt was a lack of police response, protection of their businesses. Some have taken up arms. How might that play out if and when there's more unrest?
You know, we've been assuring business owners really from the time that the August unrest ended until today. This is from Fortune 500 companies all the way down to our small-owned businesses on West Florissant, that we're going to be there for them, and we are. You know, we cannot allow looting. We cannot allow destruction of property and glass to be broken out. Listen, there's room to express our First Amendment rights, but there's not room to trample on the rights of another who owns a business. That's their only means of making a living, and those folks out there are victims too. So we have to provide that safe environment for people not only to sell their wares, but to come and buy those products.
Chief?
And Chief Elmer's absolutely right. Well, people have to remember that we have the resources and the depth of resources by working together to handle any issue that comes up.
Some people say you don't have enough resources to handle what's coming down the pike.
If you dial 911, you're going to get the same police response. You're going to get response from the county, from the highway patrol, or the city, no matter where in the region you call. The municipalities are with us. We met with the largest municipalities this morning. They have a solid plan. So while the hysteria and the media helps to feed that conversation, we have always been there, even from the first day in August when this started, and we have been able to respond, whether it's in your home or a business. And that's part of our plan, to keep you safe in your home, to keep you safe while you travel around the city and the county, to keep the businesses safe, and at the same time allow the protesters to have their constitutional rights, their First Amendment heard.
And when people say we don't have enough resources, if we look at other incidents like this throughout our country, lives were lost. We haven't lost one life. So we've had enough resources to sustain life. You know, when we talk about businesses, we are there to protect our businesses. But we need to have the appropriate plan to do that. And early on, we were formulating that plan. But to do that, we decided that we needed to make sure that we could balance both. And we saved lives, and we'll continue to do that. And we do have a great plan.
Ferguson PD, Chief Jackson, was he at the table too?
Chief Jackson was at the meeting that we were at this morning. The Ferguson Police Department was represented there.
Let's talk quickly before we go to break again about the stress these officers are under. No leave, that's been canceled, 12-hour shifts, some protesters, some shouting in their faces, some vile things. How much of that is going to be tolerated, Captain?
We're not going to allow threats to be made, persons to put their hands and physically assault our police officers. We're not going to allow that. We have to make sure that our officers are safe, because if they're unsafe or they get injured, then they can't protect the First Amendment rights of our protesters. They can't protect our citizens in our community. So we're going to make sure that they remain safe.
But are people allowed to say ugly things absent threats, Chief?
That's the conversation that we're having with the organizers when we sit down at the table. We talked about these 19 points as rules of conduct that people have introduced. And they actually go both ways. And so we all agree life safety is the #1 issue. We all agree everybody needs access to the internet. We agree. We agree on more of those 19 points than people would probably think that we do. But we're not going to allow police officers to be assaulted, their families to be threatened with real violence.
All right, we're going to take another quick break. I have those 19 points. Maybe we'll go through a few of them and see if you are on the same page. Much more of our community conversation with the leaders of the Unified Command. We'll be right back. Welcome back for more of our community conversation with the leaders of the Unified Command. The officers charged with protecting the community when the grand jury decision is announced. Everyone bracing for that. You talked about the 19 points, Chief Dobson, from the Don't Shoot Coalition. Let's just run down a few and see if you can be on the same page, because you said you agree with much of it. The first priority shall be preservation of human life.
That's our message. We want to make sure that everybody is safe. So absolutely, 100%.
Police will wear only the attire minimally required for their safety. Specialized riot gear will be avoided except as a last resort. Chief Belmar?
And you know what? That's really interesting. If we have peaceful protesters that say they are only there to protest peacefully, in some ways I wonder why they care what the officers are wearing. But we haven't seen officers injured.
They say it's incendiary.
They say that, but we react to what happens to us. And I think that we have a difficult time telling officers not to protect themselves. All three of us can give you examples of officers who have been injured while we have stood there and watched it because they weren't wearing helmets at the time. And I think we need to be very cautious before we take the officers' ability away to protect themselves when, again, like Captain Johnson said, if we can't protect ourselves, it's difficult to protect somebody else.
Something else they say, Captain Johnson, for you, police will be instructed to be tolerant of more minor law breaking, such as thrown water bottles, when deciding to use an escalation of force.
We will not allow citizens, I'll say criminals, not citizens, criminals, to throw items to injure policemen. We had a policeman who almost had his eye put out while we were standing there. We will not tolerate that.
How are you going to separate out some of these agitators who are bent on really amping the situation up? Do you have intelligence? Can you pluck them out of peaceful demonstrations? Can you do it?
You know, yes, we can at times. You know, really the damage there is, we have folks that are there exercising their First Amendment rights, and then there may be hundreds, scores, but then one or two people do something, and it's incumbent upon us to try to identify those people, get them out, but more than anything else, my goodness, if you're there to peacefully protest, to demonstrate, separate yourselves away from that group, because otherwise it's difficult for law enforcement to impact that in a positive way and not in order to prejudice everybody's rights.
Transparency is key in many ways. We in the media are that window for so many people. Are our rights going to be protected to cover this the way it needs to be covered? I know we had a little bit of confusion with the media helicopters. Chief Dotson?
Yeah, absolutely. We think that the media, and we rely on the media, to be able to tell the story accurately and truthfully. The challenge is that everybody with a cell phone now is a blogger and claims that they're with the media. So
what do you do about that?
You will have access, the media will have access to anything that the general public has access to. Just like we will protect the constitutional rights of the protesters, we'll protect your rights too. Doesn't mean you get special treatment, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be impeded either.
Quickly, Captain, citizen journalists too protected? Or are you going to make a difference?
I think this world, this community, has a right to view what's going on here and view this change. And I think the only way that they can get that is through the eyes of our media.
All right. We'll be right back. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank our special guests with the Unified Command. Thank you, and be safe out there. We pray for everyone involved. Also, don't forget, when there is a grand jury decision, we'll be back with it. You can count on us for much more. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sharon Reed.